Welcome. We thank you for joining us today. I am pleased to introduce our speaker for today, Frank Yiannas. As Vice President of Food Safety, Frank Yiannas oversees all food safety as well as other public health functions for the world's largest food retailer, Walmart, serving over 200 million customers around the world on a weekly basis. Prior to joining Walmart in 2008, Frank was the Director of Safety and Health for the Walt Disney World Company, where he worked for 19 years. In 2008, Frank was given the Collaboration Award by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. In 2007, he was the recipient of the NSF International Lifetime Achievement Award for Leadership in Food Safety. Frank is also a past president of the International Association for Food Protection and a current board member of the Global Food Safety Initiative. He's also an adjunct professor in the Food Safety Program at Michigan State University, and he's the author of the books Food Safety Culture, Creating a Behavior-Based Food Safety Management System, and Food Safety Equals Behavior, 30 Proven Techniques to Enhance Employee Compliance by Springer Scientific. This has just recently been published, and there will be more information about the book at the end of the Q&A section. Frank is a registered microbiologist with the American Academy of Microbiology and received his B.S. in microbiology from the University of Central Florida and his Master of Public Health from the University of South Florida. And very excited to introduce our speaker for today, Frank Yiannas. Frank, the floor is yours.
Very good. Well, thank you. Good afternoon for all the attendees joining us from North America, and good day for those joining from other parts of the world. I'm delighted that you've decided to spend the next hour with us, and I want to thank Ecolab for making this webinar and forum available. Really appreciate it. You know, the topic that we're going to spend an hour talking about is this concept that food safety equals behavior. And I think it's extremely relevant because it's not a topic that you often hear about in great depth at food safety conferences. There isn't a lot published in the literature about it, although that seems to be increasing. And certainly there aren't academic courses offered on it on a wide basis. So I think it's extremely relevant, and I appreciate that you find the topic to be of interest. But I'd like to start off by doing something a little bit less traditional to try to really emphasize the point on why I'm so excited that many of you have joined us today. I'm told there's close to over 500 participants via webinar, so it's a pretty large number. And so to make this point, what do you think 3 degrees has to do with the topic of today's webinar, or food safety in general? What does 3 degrees have to do with food safety? You know, I've asked this question of audiences before, and one of the common answers I get is 3 degrees is the difference between something being fully cooked or undercooked. And although as a food safety professional, that's a great answer, it's not really the response I'm looking for. And the concept is this, is that at 3 degrees, all of us working together for one purpose can make a huge difference in advancing the safety of food, whether it's here in North America or whatever country that you're calling in from. 3 degrees means that all of us working together to improve food safety with the single focus of improving customers' lives can make a big difference. And this is that concept in a little bit more detail. It's a proven behavioral science principle, and if you have an interest in it, it's published in a book by Christakis and Fowler called Connected. And the principle, the behavioral science principle is this, that most of us have the ability to influence others in a way that's related to 3 degrees away from us. We can influence people's behaviors in a wide range of areas, whether it's happiness, dietary preferences, weight, political views. And for food safety, it means this, that if there's 500 or greater on this webinar today, if all of us can influence folks 3 degrees away from us, it looks like this. At 1 degree, let's assume that we could all influence very easily leaving this webinar 20 people in our organizations or respective circles. That's reaching about 10,000 people at 1 degree away from us. If that 10,000 then goes out and reaches another 20 people, that's 200,000. And if that 200,000 then goes off and reaches another 20 people, as a result of this webinar, we have the capacity to influence easily 4 million people around North America, around the world, if not more. And so this principle that through social networks we can influence food safety. And the take-home message of this is that food safety can be as much caught as it is taught. We often think that food safety is something you teach, but food safety can be caught, not only taught. And through this principle, we have the ability to not only advance food safety and improve the quality of life for consumers around the world, but very importantly, the opportunity to save lives. Now, what I'm going to share with you over the next hour are not something that are simply theoretical ideas or techniques. They're not something that you would only hear in academic circles, but I'm going to try to share with you lessons that I've learned over a career at the Disney organization and now Walmart. And so they're real-world practical ideas and techniques that have proven to yield good results. Now, everything that I share with you will be based on science, and they won't simply be opinions, but I wanted you to know that this isn't going to be an academic exercise based strictly on theory. Let me begin with this thought that the world around us is changing very rapidly, and I think all of us on the webinar will agree. Things are changing, the food system is changing, food safety is certainly not what it used to be, but when the world and food safety is changing at the rate that it is today, really in an unprecedented manner, we have an opportunity and certainly an obligation to try to keep up and shape those changes in a way that's good for public health. And I thought I'd begin right at the outset by giving you what I refer to as the history of food safety in about 60 seconds, real quickly, just to tell you how far we've come. The beginning of time, and I use the term man affectionately to refer to both genders, men and women, but the beginning of time, man was mainly a hunter or gatherer, would go out, hunt food, and bring it back home, feed it to family. And I don't think humans at this point were too concerned with foodborne illness. You fast forward to the year 500 BC, humans said that food still spoils, let's salt it, and you have in the literature our first hint of early preservation techniques. You fast forward to 1845, a man says that salt tastes bad, here place that food on ice, another form of preservation, evidently humans eating salty food for a long time. Fast forward to 1850, the man says that ice melts fast. Let's place that food in a refrigerator. Now, they're not the GE refrigerators that you and I have at home, but they were units that contained blocks of ice. You fast forward to 1864, man said that food still spoils. Here, let's pasteurize it. And you have in the literature the advancement of the sciences through the work of one of my heroes, Louis Pasteur. 1980, the science takes what I call a quantum leap, and man says that pasteurized food doesn't last long enough. Let's irradiate it, so you now have shelf-stable foods for 40 to 50 years. 1997, man says that irradiated food is bad for you. Here, eat this all-natural fresh stuff. And at the turn of the century, man says that all-natural fresh stuff goes bad. Here, eat this food quickly before it spoils. Coming full circle. Now, when I deliver this slide in audiences, you usually hear a bit of laughter at this slide, and it's intended to be a bit humorous, but there's a lot of truth to this, isn't there? And all of you that are involved in food production are experiencing the pressure that consumers and others are placing on us for more fresh, natural, minimally processed products, and certainly that presents challenges to food safety. So, for example, we've seen a renewed interest in some circles of consumers wanting to drink unpasteurized milk, forgetting the lessons learned from public health in the past. We've seen mothers thinking that they're doing something beneficial for their children by serving them an unpasteurized fruit juice, and it resulting in illnesses. And so there are interesting times that we're in. Let me ask you this provocative question. Are we winning the battle against foodborne disease? I wish we could be live in a room so we could facilitate a conversation, but just at your seat there, think about, are we winning the battle against foodborne disease, and how would you answer that? The reality is that over the course of the 20th century in particular, we won a lot of battles against infectious disease. And on this slide, you can see infectious disease mortality or fatality in the U.S. over the course of the 1900s. And you can see this dramatic drop in illnesses and fatalities in particular. Now, if you look at 1918, thereabout, you see a pretty big increase. Do you know what that increase is? That's correct. That increase in fatalities was due to the Spanish flu of 1918 and an influenza virus, H1N1, which affected about 3 to 5% of the global population with a pretty large fatality rate of 10 to 20%. But besides that, you can see dramatic reductions in infectious diseases or deaths due to infectious diseases. I did an interesting exercise, and I looked, well, what were public health professionals talking about in the early 1900s in terms of foodborne pathogens? And in the literature, what you see, especially in the literature published by CDC, these are the pathogens of concern during the era of 1900 to 1939. You can see the organisms there: botulism, brucellosis, cholera, tapeworms, not something that food safety professionals worry about today, trichinosis. But what pathogens do you not see on this list? What are the pathogens that are not on this list that we worry about today? That's correct. You don't see E. coli or gerotoxigenic E. coli strains. You don't see Campylobacter on this list. You don't see Listeria. And you certainly don't see norovirus, pathogens that we're very, very concerned about at the dawn of the 21st century. And in fact, if you look at non-typhoid Salmonella serotypes in particular, what you see is despite the dramatic reduction in infections over the early 1900s, you see this emergence of non-typhoid Salmonella, really illustrating the point that we know with infectious organisms, they tend to evolve and change. And so we can win some battles against infectious diseases and others emerge. In fact, if you look at the dawn of the 21st century, what do you see? Two of the largest outbreaks, foodborne outbreaks, ever recorded in the history of the world, really in recent years. The Listeria outbreak associated with Rocky Ford cantaloupes that resulted in 147 cases and 33 deaths, something unheard of, Listeria in cantaloupes, and a very large E. coli outbreak, O104H4 in Germany from sprouts. A producer in Germany that was allegedly a small organic local producer, causing the world's largest E. coli outbreak and illnesses as a result of people traveling to Germany, resulting in many different countries around the world, even as far as the U.S. and Canada. And so the take-home message of these introductory slides is to challenge you and say, are we really currently winning the battle against foodborne disease? I think I've persuaded you that over the course of the century in the 1900s, we won battles against infectious diseases. But are we currently winning the battle against foodborne disease? And the best evidence or proof that we have is referring to the ultimate scorekeeper of food safety in this nation, the CDC, and their Food Net progress reports. And here's their most recent progress report for 2014. And you can see on the left what are the pathogens that they're tracking. They're expressing illnesses here in terms of a rate of the number of illnesses over 100,000 population. You can see the Healthy People 2020 target goals. And then to the far right, you can see these yellow faces. And up until 2014, you didn't see any smiley faces. I'm encouraged to see that we have two smiley faces over on the far right, but you still see some sad faces and a lot of neutral faces. And as a food safety professional, I'm sure you have the same sentiment that I do, is that we want to see a lot more smiley faces on the right. And so the reality is, by the metrics that we're using today, our progress against foodborne disease, although we're making a little bit of progress, in some respects it has stalled. And why is that? Why is it that we're not making more advancements in reducing the burden of foodborne disease in this country and abroad? And here's the take-home message I want you to remember, that what got us here, the dramatic reduction in infectious diseases that you saw in the 1900s, what got us to the place of where we're at in the year 2014 is not going to be what gets us there in terms of meeting our Healthy People 2020 goals. And to reduce or to further reduce foodborne illness, I believe we have to do things differently and in some cases significantly differently. And so we have to change the way we're approaching food safety. And quite frankly, one of the messages of this webinar is that I believe that you as a food safety professional have an obligation to add new tools to your tool bag or toolbox of fighting foodborne disease. And so let me just summarize here before we pivot and start talking specifically on the call to action, which is some of the trends that we're seeing. Clearly, we have a changing food system. I shared that with you. Foodborne disease surveillance, we know, is getting really good with techniques such as post-field gel electrophoresis and more recently whole genome sequencing, and how that's increasing our ability to make the invisible visible and detect illnesses related to food that would have gone unnoticed. We know that the pathogens continue to change and emerge, and I've tried to convince you of that premise. We know that we have an increased at-risk population, and this is a good thing in that modern medicine is allowing people to live longer and with certain conditions, but it does make people, in some cases, more at risk of foodborne disease. We know there are new and emerging food vehicles implicated in foodborne illness, and social media. You know, if you think social media can play a role in toppling governments, it certainly has a role to play in food safety and foodborne illness. And we know that with social media, small scares have the ability to go from a small flame to a forest fire almost overnight. And in a real positive sense, we know that social media has the ability to detect foodborne outbreaks maybe even faster than traditional health reporting. And so all of these trends and more are presenting what I would refer as challenges to food safety. Challenges to food safety. And I don't want you to be really discouraged by that. And there aren't any silver bullets, but there are things we can do to address these challenges. Now, what are those things? I were to ask you, well, based on the trends and the challenges that I've just shared with you, how can you make progress in food safety? I would suspect that if we could take a poll right now, there would be three predominant answers, and they're what I call traditional food safety strategies. Number one, some would say, well, Frank, we're going to do better training this year, or we're investing in more training. The reality is we've been training in the area of food safety for a long, long time. And although some will say, Frank, our training today is better than it's been in the past, we now have required certifications, it's still training, and that answer really doesn't impress me that much. Another response might be, well, Frank, inspections. This year we're going to do better inspections, risk-based audits, if you will. We might do even, these benchmark certifications. And while all those are good and needed, that answer really doesn't impress me that much either, because we've been doing food safety inspections or audits in some way, shape, or form for many, many years. And then some will say, and as a registered microbiologist, this I appreciate. Some will say, Frank, we're going to do better food testing this year. We have rapid methods. We're going to have a more robust sampling plan. We're going to really leverage and do a better job with environmental monitoring, and all that's great, and you should do that. But at the end of the day, that answer doesn't really impress me that much either, because we've been testing foods or indicators in food for over 100 years. And so just pause and think about this. Despite the fact that literally millions of people have been trained in food safety, tens of millions of audits and inspections are done at retail and manufacturing at the farm around the world, and literally hundreds of millions of tests are done globally on an annual basis, food safety remains a significant health or public health problem. Why is that? Despite the fact that we're doing all this work. And let me illustrate this point. I shared with you that progress has stalled when we use the ultimate lagging indicator of food safety, or the ultimate outcome metric of food safety, food net data. But how about some of the leading indicators? And I just took data published by the FDA on retail food delis with out-of-compliance rates as per the FDA baseline studies that have been published in 98, 2003, and 2008. And what do you see? Well, you see an improper holding temperatures, an out-of-compliance rate that really hasn't changed too much over a decade. How about poor personal hygiene? Out-of-compliance rates that really haven't changed that much over a decade. Protection from contamination, really no significant change. Same thing with inadequate cooking and so on. And quite frankly, I would suggest that if I looked at internal data from your respective organizations and companies, and if you were candid with me, you'd probably find the same thing. Despite the fact that you've been doing a lot of work, your out-of-compliance rates aren't changing that much. And in fact, how would you rate this data published by FDA? You would say probably not too good. Not a lot of changes there. So why is it that we're doing all this work and we're not seeing different results? And I'd like to share this quote to you from psychologist Abraham Maslow, who said, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail. And I would suggest that some food safety professionals have been walking around with a tool bag with just a few tools in it, 3 tools in particular. They have the training tool in their tool bag, they have the inspection tool in their tool bag, and they have the testing tool in their tool bag. And for almost every problem that comes up, they're going to try to solve it with one of these tools. I think we need new tools in our tool bag. Pause to think about it. Let's pause for a moment and envision somebody using a cutting board to cut raw chicken, and then using that same cutting board to cut and prepare a salad, whether it's in the workplace or at home. And what is that? Most people would say cross-contamination. Well, I like to look beyond that, and although cross-contamination is a good epidemiological technical term, what I see is a human behavior. How about this idea? If you're working in a health department and you're trying to improve the food safety performance in the community, and I use the Arkansas Department of Health simply because that's in my home state now, what do they have to do? They have to change the behaviors of employees in the workforce or the institutions that they're regulating. And how about your respective place of employment? For me in particular, if I want to improve the food safety performance of an organization the size and scale of Walmart, what do I have to do? I have to influence and shape the behaviors of 2.2 million associates around the world. And so food safety, if I walked up to a chalkboard and wrote the most simple or concrete definition or equation for what I believe food safety is, it's this equation. Food safety equals behavior. And it's impossible to improve food safety without influencing the behaviors of others, whether it's distinct, really attributable behaviors at the individual level, whether it's the behaviors of an organization, even the thoughts and attitudes and behaviors of senior management. If you want to improve food safety in a manufacturing plant or make investments, they all have human elements. And so we have to get better at influencing and changing human behavior. And that's the fundamental premise of this webinar. Now, some will say, well, if it's just behavior change, then Frank, we really need to focus on training or retraining. Let me just give you this quote by B.F. Skinner, and I love it. It's that behavior change is extremely complex. And if you think you're going to change behaviors because you're going to do audits or training, although you might be well-intentioned, you're certainly misinformed. And so what I'm going to ask you today is really sign up to this fact that you as a food safety leader and manager, you have to move from being what I would call a traditional food safety manager to a behavior-based food safety manager. And let me briefly describe the differences. A traditional food safety manager focuses on processes. You know, how do you cook something thoroughly, and how do you rapidly cool it, and how do you prevent cross-contamination? As a behavior-based food safety manager, I want you to really master those processes and simplify them, but you need to really understand and put a lot of emphasis and weight on the people portion of the process. A traditional food safety manager is primarily based on food science, and what I'm going to ask you and encourage and admonish each one of you to do is realize that the food sciences alone will not make you successful in your job. But you have to master the food sciences, which presumably you all got through your certifications and training and degrees, but you also have to equip yourself with skills related to behavioral sciences, it's a science too, and master concepts of organizational culture. A traditional food safety manager has a very simplistic view of behavior change. If I do A and influence it, I can get result B. Behavior-based food safety managers understand that behavior change is a little bit more complex, and they consider not only personal attributes on changing behavior, but environmental design and other factors. Again, traditional food safety managers are very simplistic, that linear mindset that I just described, whereas a behavior-based food safety manager has more of a systems thinking mindset. And then last but not least, your job is not to create a food safety program, but your job is to actually strengthen or create food safety culture, and they're very different. So how are you going to transition from becoming a traditional food safety manager to becoming a behavior-based food safety manager? Well, I told you, I want you to really lean in and start investing in studying the behavioral sciences and theories and models. And there's a lot of them out there. I just have a few here to share with you. I'm not going to go into them in great detail. You have the behavioral theory, obviously based on B.F. Skinner's work on operant conditioning, which suggests that you pair behavior with a reinforcer or some type of stimuli to change behavior. You have social cognitive theory. You have the health belief model, which is one often used by public health professionals that really centers around four key concepts of risk perception, how severe does somebody see that risk to be, their perception of the benefit of the action or desired behavior that you're asking them to take, And then lastly, number 4, what are the barriers to actually adopting that behavior? Theory of reason action, trans-theoretical model, and then lastly, social marketing. I won't spend a lot of time on this one, but if you had an appetite to pick up a book, I would say pick up a book on social marketing. And basically, it's this model that people do a pretty good job of using marketing techniques to try to influence you to buy certain products or to take certain vacations, such as visiting Disneyland. And that a lot of those same techniques can be used to try to influence or shape behaviors for public good. And so social marketing is basically a model that takes proven traditional marketing techniques and applies them to public health issues. So I want you to really become a student of the behavioral sciences. But what I'm going to do for the remainder of our time is I'm going to take you through 4 behavioral science principles. They're all listed in my most recent book, where I've published 30 behavioral science principles. But the good news is this. Over the past 50 years, there's been a tremendous amount of articles published in the behavioral science and social science literature that if we, as food safety professionals, just glean, understand, and try to apply in our profession, we can make a world of difference. And so over the years, what I've done is I've read literally hundreds of studies, and I've distilled them down into some that I think are most beneficial. But I'm going to real quickly present 4 of them, and there's others if you're so inclined or have an interest. And the first behavioral science principle that I want to talk to you about is this principle of consistency and commitment. And I want you to add this to your tool bag, because I guarantee you that if you do, you will get better results. And it's basically this, that human beings want to behave in a way that's consistent with things they've said or have written in the past. You know, something about our DNA and the way we're hardwired, human beings do not want to be known as wishy-washy or liars. To be a flip-flopper is a socially undesirable trait. And so how do you leverage this principle of consistency and commitment to improve food safety? Let me show you how this principle works and why it's so important. I want to share with you a study that was published regarding reservations at a restaurant in Chicago. This restaurant in particular had a pretty high what we call no-show rate, meaning that people would make a reservation, but they wouldn't show up. Now, if you're managing a restaurant and you have a very high no-show rate, that's a problem because, you know, every table for you is represents customers in dollars. But this place had a pretty high no-show rate. And the way it would work is if you called this restaurant and you tried to make a reservation, the receptionist would say to you, please call if you're going to cancel your reservation, and hang up. And their no-show rate was 30%. 1 out of every 3 tables reserved, nobody showed. Big problem. So these behavioral science researchers wanted to know if leveraging this principle of commitment and consistency, could they make a difference? And what they asked the receptionist to do is pretty simple. You could see on that slide there, they basically just said at the end of that call, when you take the reservation, we want you to do something that's pretty minor, painless, and doesn't cost money. Rather than saying, please call if you're going to cancel your reservation, simply insert 2 words before that, will you please call if you're going to cancel your reservation, and pause with a question mark, forcing the person on the other line to make a commitment. Yes, I will call you if I'm going to cancel my reservation. And by making this small but subtle change, but very powerful with behavioral science insights, what do you think happened? They had a dramatic reduction in no-shows from 30% to 10%. Now, it's pretty simple, but how many of us work really hard to try to make a 20% gain in compliance rates? It's very difficult to do, and oftentimes we're willing to spend a lot of money. And these types of results can be achieved just by understanding human behavior. Here's another illustration of this behavioral science principle of commitment using something that's referred to by behavioral scientists as the foot in the door technique. And this was a study that was done in California by Friedman and Fraser and published in the literature, where they took a neighborhood in California and divided it into 2 parts. One side of the neighborhood, they sent students door to door trying to promote safe driving techniques. And so a student researcher under the auspices of promoting community goodwill would go up to the doors, knock, and when the homeowner came out, they'd say, hey, we've noticed people are speeding in your neighborhood. We want to try to slow that down as a community good works effort. And so we'd like for you to put this sign in your front yard that's says drive carefully. At this point, they would take out a 8 by 10 color photograph that showed a picture of the sign, which is really, really large, 5 by 7 feet in dimensions, blocking the home, really an eyesore. And they'd ask homeowners, are you willing to put that sign in your front yard? And what percentage of the time do you think people actually agreed to put a sign like this in their front yard? 17% of the time, not that often. In fact, I wouldn't have predicted it be that high. They then went to a second part of the neighborhood, and a similar student went to the front door, knocked, and asked people to do something, but the request was a little bit different. Rather than asking these homeowners, are you willing to put up this large sign, they said, hey, I'm here promoting safe driving in the community. We've noticed people are speeding through the neighborhood. Would you be willing to put this sticker in your front window? And the sticker was very small, on the order of 2 to 4 inches in dimensions. And it said, be a safe driver. The reality, drivers wouldn't see that. But nevertheless, when they asked homeowners to do this, about 100% of the homeowners said, yeah, that's a pretty benign request, and they were willing to let the student put the sticker in the front window. They then waited a few weeks and came back to these homeowners and made the original request that they made in the first part of the experiment in another area of the neighborhood. And after they had placed the sticker in the front window and it was placed there for a period of a few weeks, they would come back and ask, hey, we're here promoting safe driving. We know you were committed to the cause. You let us put the sticker in your window. And this time they would ask a larger request. Would you be willing to put this drive carefully sign because the sticker evidently isn't making that much of a difference? And they proceeded to do the same thing that was done originally by pulling out an 8 by 10 color photograph and showing the homeowners how this might look. The exact same request, although if you catch it, it's done a little subtly. They did the foot in the door by originally getting people to commit to the Be a Safe Driver sticker. And in this scenario, how many times or what percentage of the homeowners do you think allowed them to put this big sign in their front lawn? Compliance jumped to 76%, almost a 60% increase in compliance for a pretty large request. I don't know about you. I find this study to be amazing. And behavioral scientists call this the foot in the door technique, leveraging the principle of commitment and consistency. Once homeowners had committed to that smaller sticker, they already signaled that they were committed to safe driving in the neighborhood. They almost felt obligated to then comply with the second larger request. Now, you might ask yourself, Frank, what in the heck does this have to do with food safety? And I would suggest that the inferences from these studies are powerful and extremely meaningful to what we're talking about today. And so let me share with you one way that you might leverage it, although I want you to pause, think about right now some of the ideas that come to mind, and after the webinar, jot down more ideas. But how can you leverage the principle of commitment in your organization? One way is regarding training and education. We know that we all spend a lot of time training and educating our employees, and when they come to classes or take learning modules on a computer, what do we have them do? At the end, we generally have them sign that they've completed a training or education curriculum. Now, why do we do that? The reality is that most of us do that as a CYA, so that we have a record that the employee has been trained, and, you know, if they don't follow or adhere to practices, we now can discipline or coach them. Or we might even do it because we want a record for regulatory compliance purposes. I would suggest that having an employee sign a statement at the end of a training or education curriculum just to have a record is short-sighted. And so leveraging this principle of commitment, one of the things we've done here at Walmart is we ask our associates at the end of training and education to commit to applying the principles or the practices that they've learned in that course. So that's a very simple way. And although we haven't done this, I would suspect that if you're in a academic institution and you want to actually research this, all of the studies suggest to me that you would notice that the behaviors were more consistent with the principles taught if you had them make a written commitment as opposed to just signing that they've attended the class as a roster. And so that's just a simple and powerful illustration of how you can use this principle of completion or commitment in your place of employment. Let me give you a second tool to add to your tool bag. And it's this principle, birds of a feather influence food safety for better. Come on, we've all heard this phrase, birds of a feather stick together. What is it? It's based on a behavioral science principle that was published in the 1950s. Sociologists coined it, this principle of homophily, which means that we are all human beings, and we tend to connect with people that are similar to us, whether it's similar to us in terms of age, ethnicity, interest, occupational role within an organization. We like people that are like us. It's just human nature. And so how might you leverage this principle to improve food safety? It's clear that it works. In fact, F.B. Evans published a study in 1969 where, working with insurance companies and getting insurance demographic data, they were able to prove that insurance agents that were more similar to the prospects they were trying to sell policies to, whether they were similar in age or politics. In this study, even something as unique as cigarette smoking, if they were similar to the prospects, they were more likely to finalize the sale. In a more recent example of this, although there are over 100 studies published on the principle of homophily, there was a study published by Centola of adoption of an online diet diary. In this situation, the researchers would get people to sign up and they'd place them in two different types of groups. One is a homophilous group. People were similar in certain attributes, as well as to the seed instructor in each group, somebody that was unknown to the people that were in that group. And they assigned them to unstructured groups. And when people tended to be assigned in the homophilous group, if the seed, the first person that's supposed to take an action by adopting the online behavior and anybody else in that network could see it, was homophilous to you, you increase the chances of others in that group adopting those behaviors. And so clearly another demonstration that homophily really works. What does homophily, or this principle that birds of a feather stick together, have to do with food safety? Well, let me give you just one example on how you could use it. And so I'm going to show you a video that we've created here at Walmart. The principle is that rather than Frank Yiannas as Vice President of Food Safety trying to talk about food safety or getting leaders or managers to talk about food safety, we get a real-world associate, somebody that other associates can identify with, and have them talk about food safety. So here's a real Walmart associate, Durrell, also known as Mr. Rollback. We actually are using him on commercials too, and you could see him deliver this message. So let's roll the video.
Not only does Walmart have great prices, but we're serving up safe and affordable food. And I love food. You love food? I love food. We like to keep our customers happy and healthy by keeping our cold foods cold and our hot foods hot. That's hot. We keep it cold and we keep it hot for everyone's safety. Hey, it's cold back here. Ooh, ice cream. Food safety high five. It begins with you.
Very good. So hopefully you saw there the principle of homophily in action. Again, rather than having an executive at home office communicate with frontline employees on the importance of food safety, what we did there was took a figure that's identifiable, that has credibility with associates, Durrell, who legitimately works in one of our stores, and we use him to deliver our food safety messages and sound bites. And we believe that that's paid dividends and really has worked well for us. Let me then move on to another tool that I'd like for you to add to your tool bag. And this one is this principle of making food safety the social norm. How do you make food safety the social norm in your organization? This one's clearly and directly related to culture. You know, you can't make food safety part of your culture unless it becomes a social norm, and many others are doing and believing and practicing it. Let me illustrate this point. Again, it's a principle well-founded and proven in the behavioral science literature. And I'll refer to you to a study that was done by Stanley Milgram in 1969. And many of you might remember this through Psych 101 that you took in college. But in this study, what some researchers did, they put a single person on a busy street corner, and they had them looking up. And as people walked by, they counted how many people will actually look up as well to see or to mimic what the other person is doing. And in most cases, it's about 40% of people that walk by, 4 out of every 10 will pause and look up when you have a single person looking up. These researchers then proceeded to put 2 people on a street corner and then 3 people on the street corner looking up. And as people walked by, they again counted how many people stopped to look up. And the more people you had on that street corner looking up, when you hit, I think the number was 3, all of a sudden 85% of the people that walk by are looking up as well. And before you know it, you've got a large crowd on that street corner looking up at absolutely nothing. And I know some of you might have chuckled because it's humorous, but it illustrates the point that human beings, we're social beings, and we tend to do what other people do. As another illustration, and maybe more convincing illustration of this point, it's the Solomon-Asch experiment, 1958, on conformity. Conformity being, related to social norm, and that people want to conform with the behaviors and actions of others. And I think, again, humans are wired to say we can take some behavioral shortcuts. If everybody else is doing it, it must be right. And in this experiment, what you see was there was a classroom, and in the classroom you have an instructor that's in on the experiment and the students that are on the experiment, except for one lone subject that's being researched. And what happens is the instructor would walk up to the board and exhibit one, they'd draw a line. Then on the board, they'd draw 3 more lines. You'll see in Exhibit 2, line A, B, and C, and then they'd go around the classroom and ask students, well, which line is equal to in length to Exhibit 1? Is it line A, B, and C? And they'd begin by asking the question to somebody that's part of the research experiment, and they'd say, it's A, and they'd go around the class, and everyone would say, A is the line that's equal to Exhibit 1. They'd then go up to the board and draw another series of lines, and they'd go around again. And this time, the first student that they ask, who again is in on the experiment, intentionally gives the wrong answer. And they say, well, it's line B that's equal in length to Exhibit 1. The next student, also in on the experiment, says it's line B. And by the time you get to that research student, or the student that's actually being researched, that student is so confused that oftentimes, believe it or not, they would also go along with the answer B. They'd rub their eyes and they'd think, maybe I got a vision problem. But if everybody else is saying that the correct answer is B, maybe they know something that I don't, and they answer B. And in fact, disturbingly, about a third of the time, the students would actually go along with the wrong answer, just demonstrating and illustrating the social norm pressure of conformity and how it has the ability to influence others. Here's a more practical experiment done in a discipline that's related to our profession. And this was a study done by Olson and others not too many years ago, where they actually wanted to see if this principle of social norm could influence behaviors for positive occupational health benefits. And in this scenario, what they did was they would show a person a video, and the video actually depicted how to use a particular piece of noisy X-ray equipment. In the video participants would actually use this noisy piece of equipment, an X-ray equipment, and put on hearing protection sometimes. In one of the videos, there's always in each video 3 people in the video demonstrating how to use the X-ray equipment. And in one of the videos, none of the 3 ever put on the blue hearing protection. In the second video, one of the 3 people in the video actually put on the hearing protection. In the third version of the video, 2 of the 3 people in the video depicting how to use the equipment put it on. And in the last video, every single person that you observe in the video actually puts on the hearing protection. And so they assign populations to view one of these 4 videos. And then afterwards, they actually turn them loose on the work without any written description. They send them to a piece of X-ray equipment. They intentionally have, without telling them verbally that it's there, blue hearing protection on top of the X-ray equipment. And then they measure how many times people just naturally, because of what they've seen in the video, put on the hearing protection. And what they saw was that the number of people that just got turned loose to do or operate the equipment based on which video they saw was directly proportional to how many people in the video actually used the hearing protection. In other words, when hearing protection was the social norm, 3 out of the 3 people actually depicting the behavior on the video, when you turn somebody loose after seeing that training to actually operate the equipment, the majority of them would wear the hearing protection. But if they didn't see it, you could see the compliance percentages were much less. And in fact, the researchers kind of proposed that the decrease in compliance between video 1, 0 of 3, and 1 of 3 is because 1 of 3 definitely shows that it's not the social norm, not everybody follows it. But directionally or linearly, you could see that the more you showed the right behavior, the more likely other people will do it. Now, I will tell you, as food safety professionals, we often get this wrong. We use and leverage videos to try to influence behavior, but what do we generally do? We show the behavior just once. And I would suggest that if you want it to be portrayed as the social norm, you need to show the behavior more than once in a training video. So what does this mean to food safety? Again, I think the inferences are powerful. Let me give you an example on how public health professionals often get it wrong. We know that the American Society for Microbiology often does these studies, and you've read about it in the newspapers, where they go out into very populated areas and they measure how many people are washing their hands after using the restroom. And these are what the headlines look like. This literally came out of a newspaper. Observational study finds 1/3 of men don't wash hands in public restrooms. They go into ballparks and airports and measure. Now, based on this principle of social norm that I've just described to you, what's wrong with this headline? The reality is that if you really wanted to make a difference and enhance hand washing behaviors, what you would say is that the majority of men do wash their hands after using the restroom, not trying to portray it as though a large percentage don't. And in fact, there was a student that actually wanted to see if this principle could work in a real world setting, and it was a student at Michigan State University, and what she did was she actually asked young males at at Michigan State University if they washed their hands after using the restroom, and it was about 75% of the males at the college campus washed their hands after using the restroom. Leveraging this principle of social norm, she did something quite innovative, unique, and different. She actually put signs on the college restrooms, the male restrooms on campus, that read 4 out of 5 males wash their hands. And the sign itself, I don't have a picture of it here, actually depicted a college male on campus with a Michigan State Spartan ball cap on. And then they measured what percentage of males actually washed their hands after seeing this type of message. And what do you think happened? A pretty substantial and easy increase in hand compliance rates by 11%, just by communicating on signs and symbols, something that many of us do, but doing it in a way that depicted or communicated hand washing as the social norm. And I hope, again, this is just a powerful and simple illustration on how understanding some of these behavioral science principles can give you a big lift in compliance with little effort and minimal cost. Now, I love this illustration because it shows to me the creativity of leveraging these principles. What do we see in restrooms around the world and certainly around North America? We see messages that say employees must wash their hands after using the restroom or before returning to work. Do we think those are effective? Think about it. They're on all of the signs. No, they're absolutely not effective. A better sign would be something like this, although people wouldn't want to admit that their employees don't always wash their hands. But how about something like just our employees wash their hands? And really instilling or inferring this principle of commitment on employees that have gone to the restroom before they return to work. And so just a powerful, I think, illustration of this principle in action and how you might use it. And then last but not least, I'm going to close with this 4th tool that you can add to your toolbox. And it's this principle that you're better off trying to influence values to change behaviors than trying to write or implement more policies. And to illustrate this point, again, I'll share a proven study. This is, again, based on sound behavioral science. And it was a study that was done by Blankenship, Wegener, and Murray just a couple of years ago. And I don't want to be controversial, but let me just share with you the issue. And this is just to make the point, not to make a comment. But they wanted to study the policy of affirmative action. And what they did was they divided the class into 2 sections, and they told the class, one section of the class, and mind you, this paper was exactly the same paper. Both parts of the class read the exact same paper. Every single word on it was the same. Every single I that was dotted was the same. Every single T crossed. But one was portrayed as an opinion column on affirmative action, a policy, versus the other part of the class reading an opinion column on what they thought was on equality, a value. And then they measured people's kind of opinions of affirmative action pre and post reading the editorial, and measured which one's views changed the most. And which one's views do you think changed the most? Yep, you got it right clearly. The people that thought they were reading an opinion piece or editorial on the value of equality. And so people, if you want to influence or change their behaviors, you need to tunnel under their attitudes, and you certainly aren't going to do it with policies or procedures or SOPs. But if you can link food safety to something that they value or believe in, you're much more likely to influence their behaviors. What does that mean to food safety? Let me give you just a simple illustration on how we leverage it, but I'm sure you can think of more in your own for your unique and respective organization. At our organization, we often talk about our three basic beliefs: respect for the individual, striving for excellence, and serving our customers. And so when we talk about food safety, rather than saying it's a regulatory requirement or it's something in the food code, although those are important, we talk about food safety as being part of our basic beliefs. It's because we respect the individual that we care about their safety. And for example, we take food temperatures. One of our beliefs is we serve our customers, and the way we talk about that, it's because we serve our customers, we're going to do it safely. It's part of our guiding basic beliefs. And then another one of our basic beliefs is striving for excellence. Well, you can't be excellent if you're not doing whatever you're doing in a safe and compliant manner. And so we talk about striving for excellence by starting with safety first. And so hopefully that's just a very simple but powerful illustration of how we're leveraging values and beliefs to try to improve food safety and compliance. And so in summary, what I've shared with you are that there are challenges to food safety. I gave you numerous ones at the outset. I've told you that if there was one definition or equation you should use to define food safety, it's that food safety equals behavior. And I gave you 4 behavioral science principles that I've referred to as new tools that you can add to your tool bag. And I'm pretty convinced and absolutely will make this guarantee if you leverage them the right way, you'll get better results. The principle of consistency and commitment asks you to be creative and consider how you can implement it in your organization. This principle of homophily, are you doing enough with that? The importance of making food safety the social norm in the way you communicate and report information. And then lastly, are you leveraging in using your organization's values or belief systems to change behaviors as opposed to relying on policies, procedures, laws, and SOPs? And with that, I'll just share this comment because I genuinely believe that never before in history, I think as a profession, have we been so well positioned to advance food safety and improve public health through a better integration of these 2 important sciences, food sciences and behavioral sciences. And so with that, I want to just close and thank each and every one of you for listening in, for investing an hour of your time on this webinar, and very importantly, for what you're doing to help us and others provide safe and affordable food so people worldwide can live better. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Frank. That was really a lot of great information, and I think a lot of ideas that people can think about in going back to their own companies. We're almost at the top of the hour, but if people can hang with us for a couple minutes, I do want to get in a couple of questions. One is, when looking for new training associates, does the thinking about food safety equaling behavior, does that change the credentials that we're looking for in our trainers, or change the training that they should have to bring in this philosophy?
No, I think that's great. You know, I don't know how your organization tries to select training instructors or education instructors, but I would tell you 2 features that I think would be important. One is, how well attuned are they to principles of behavioral change in human behavior? Because, again, training doesn't equal behavior change. And so one is, you know, do they understand concepts of behavioral sciences and how to leverage them? And then the second principle is this principle of homophily. How well do they connect with the people that they're trying to influence, knowing that people tend to listen to and respect people that are a lot like them? And so, for example, I wouldn't expect Frank Yiannas to go to a very far distance part of the world, let's say China or South Africa or any other country, and be very effective at influencing the behaviors of frontline staff. And so I would just consider those 2 factors quite prominently in my selection process.
Okay, and then one other question, and then I hope people can hang on because I do want to talk about your book a little bit. If food safety equals behavior, why do you think behavioral change concepts are so noticeably absent in food safety curriculums, textbooks, and conferences?
Well, they're noticeably absent because I think we've over-relied on these three tools of training, inspections, and testing. In fact, if you look at how we were trained in college, we didn't get the behavioral sciences. You might have taken a general psychology course as part of your prerequisites or your AA. And so I just think it's the growing realization in our profession, as has been the case in other professions, to realize, hey, even if we train people the right way, even if we give them the best personal protective equipment, people might still get hurt on the job or they might still commit unsafe food practices. And it's this whole concept that there's this whole behavioral side of human beings that we need to understand and master. And how do you do that? Some of it is how you design work, the work tools that you give in the facility, but even when you design everything right, you still have the element of behavior. And so success to me begins with just this, recognition that we need to consider behavior in how we solve some of these problems.
So to keep advancing how we train, how we communicate, how we work with individuals to bring them all together.
Yeah, these behavioral science principles, I would say, don't just limit it to your training and education program. To me, it begins with understanding human behavior, how you design the facility. We try to design things to make it so easy that people will naturally be in compliance. Number two, the procedures that we develop, are they more pronely for people to adhere and follow? Number three, then how do we do education and training in a way that maximizes or influences human behavior? Four, the communication that we do, are we communicating in a way that influences human behavior? Five, measure. Are we measuring in a way and communicating those measurements in a way that depicts food safety as the social norm to influence human behavior? So I would say just make sure behavior is central to all of the things that you're doing, not just training and education.
Well, thank you so much. That was great information. And just want to mention, from Ecolab, for those of you who would like to learn more, Frank has given some techniques, but there's 30 techniques in his new book, Food Safety Equals Behavior, and that's available from Springer Scientific or on Amazon. But for the first 3 people who tweet today something that they've learned to @Ecolab, they're going to get a free signed copy of Frank's book, Food Safety Equals Behavior. So everyone, get out your iPhones or your smartphones and tweet to us and let us know what you think and let us know what you learned today. And again, Frank, we really appreciate your participation today. That was a great presentation.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And I just want to remind everyone, there will be, the recording of this will be available, so if there's anything you want to go back and listen to again or to let your friends and associates know, that will be available if you go to the Ecolab website, ecolab.com/mediacenter/presentations. This presentation, along with previous presentations, are available there. And also next month, for Keeping It Clean in 2015, we're going to have Dr. Anna Starobin, who's a senior scientist with Ecolab, talking about to clean or not to clean, prevention of biofilm formation. So we hope that you can join us then. And when you exit the webinar today, you will get sent to a link for our survey, and this is also where you ask for continuing education certificates. And you can also send in to me, miriam.eisenberg@ecolab.com, if you listen to any previous webinars as well. Thank you so much for attending today, and we will speak to you next month on August 18th. Thank you.